Chris Hedges, you'll be speaking today on the issue of war.
Yeah, I mean, I look at what's happened since September 17th, when Zuccotti Park was taken, as the launching of a process that's probably quite long. I think of where we're headed as a revolution, and all revolutions begin long before their ostensible date. The Stamp Act of 1765 was sort of the dress rehearsal for the uprising against the British. A decade later, the uprising in 1905 in Russia was the precursor, created the system by which eventually the Tsar would be overthrown. And I think that it's unfair to sort of pin this movement on a particular day or a particular action. I think it's begun. I think it's going forward. I think it could be years in the process. But I think that the power elite, the oligarchic corporate class, is as corrupt, as fragile, and as decayed as bankrupt regimes in the past. 1789 in France was ungovernable. You know, the elite had retreated into Versailles, as our elites have retreated into their gated compounds, utterly out of touch with the suffering of the ordinary American. And so I think that what's happening today is momentous, not because of the numbers they may get or not get, but because this isn't going away.
We're going to break, come back. Our guests are Amin Husain. Among his titles, he's one of the editors of Title magazine. Chris Hedges is with us, Teresa Gutierrez, and Marina Citrin. This is Democracy Now! It's May Day. Back in a minute. Ahead of May Day, new reports have emerged of major banks working with police to monitor Occupy protesters. According to Bloomberg News, the nation's largest banks are sharing information about protesters' May Day plans amongst themselves as well as with police. This is Paul Violas, CEO of the firm Risk Control Strategies.
We're looking at a group of folks that are in fact organized, even though we don't give them credit for that. These are educated people. These are not only educated people, but they're intelligent. And on top of that, now they're well-funded. So if you put all of those things together, and then you take away, like our, good old Maslow used to say, hierarchy of needs, you take away their food, their water, their shelter, you take away their ability to earn, and now you have people that are just genuinely angry, and their disdain, their lips drip with disdain towards those that have. And I'm not saying it's justified or not justified, it is what it is. And that leads you into where we are today, this platform of risk, where the trajectory is going to be very clear. It's going to be, how do I interrupt business, and how do I make you pay? Someone is going to pay, according to them, for their lot in life, and that's the direction it looks like they're going to take.
Paul Violas, CEO of the firm Risk Control Strategies. Chris Hedges.
Well, there you go. That is a window into how frightened the elites are of this movement. And he laid it out in pretty stark terms. It's classic counterinsurgency tactics, something I watched up close for 5 years covering the war in El Salvador. You deny your opponent fixed base because it makes logistics extremely difficult. You keep them constantly on the move. You make it hard for them to organize and sustain themselves. You carry out constant harassment. And you mentioned the breaking down of the door of an Occupy activist in Brooklyn last night. That's just sort of de rigueur. And you infiltrate the movement. We've seen the external forces that have been deployed against the occupying encampments in a coordinated attempt to sort of wipe them out. What we don't see is the systematic effort to break the movement from the inside. And that is by creating divisions, discrediting the most effective leaders or locking them up. The resources of the state, which I think that this interview began to give us a glimpse of, are an indication of how worried they are, because this movement articulates a truth, a fundamental truth about our system, about the corporate coup d'etat that we have undergone. And
what do you mean by that?
That over the last decade or two, we have seen corporate forces seize all levers of power. The executive branch, the legislative branch, the judiciary. Certainly look at all of the Supreme Court rulings, including the most recent one on strip searching.
Which
said it was a complete inversion of law. It said that corrections officers and police officials are allowed to strip search you even if you're innocent, because the person who brought the suit had been stopped in a car. He had been innocent. They'd accused him of not paying a fine that he'd fined. They held him for a week. They strip searched him. So this person had committed no crime. He was in the passenger seat of the car that had been pulled over. And that's just an inversion of law. It means that you cannot question the abuse of authority. I mean, that's just a small window. 2001 Citizens United essentially extinguished what is left of participatory democracy in this country. And as Amin correctly pointed out, we are spiraling downward in this new world of global neo-feudalism, this world of masters and serfs. And as more and more people wake up, they are going to have to implement the harsher measures of control that we see being made into law, such as the Espionage Act, which has been used 6 times by the Obama administration to shut down people who have exposed war crimes and malfeasance by the government, so that only the official narrative is palatable or permissible, and we're seeing that as they leak information about the murder. Let's be clear, Osama bin Laden was unarmed. The murder or assassination of Osama bin Laden. Investigative reporters in this country will tell you sources have utterly dried up, and that, as you mentioned before, is why I and other plaintiffs, including Noam Chomsky and Daniel Ellsberg, and Cornel West is going to join us, and Naomi Wolf, are suing over the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows the military to become a policing agent in this country, to detain American citizens, hold them without due process, including holding them in our offshore penal colonies until, in the language of this bill, the end of hostilities, which in an age of permanent war is forever. And we have to stop looking. Teresa correctly pointed out, I mean, and you pointed out, that this is a president who has carried out the most egregious assaults on our civil liberties, far worse than the Bush administration, and through the magic of public relations, we continue to be utterly fooled by what's happening.
You all sound somewhat like you agree, but you don't. Chris, you wrote a piece called "The Cancer in Occupy." Lay out your concern.
My concern is that the tactics of people who identify themselves as Black Bloc, i.e. petty vandalism, taunting the police, covering your faces, are the portal by which the agents provocateurs can enter and destroy the movement. The power of the Occupy movement is that it is a mainstream movement. It expresses and articulates the grievances of the mainstream, which are not articulated during this political process. They are not articulated on MSNBC or Fox or any of the other commercial corporate networks. If you look at the opinion polls, whether it's on health care, whether it's on the looting of the U.S. Treasury and the largest transference of wealth upwards in American history, whether it's on foreclosures and bank repossessions of homes, whether it is this failure to confront egregious levels of unemployment, especially for those under the age of 25, the Occupy movement expresses what the majority feels. And the goal of the security state is to sever the movement from the mainstream. And the way they will do that is by using groups, and some of these people may be well-meaning, but by using groups that will frighten the mainstream away. You do not want to have demonstrations where you permit people to cover their faces. That's a gift to infiltrators. We cannot beat the security and surveillance state at their own game. We can't. Our power, and Václav Havel wrote this in his 1978 essay, The Power of the Powerless. There's a kind of incongruity to it, but our greatest strength is our powerlessness and our transparency, and we can't give that up. You know, I'm not a member of Occupy. I've never identified myself as a member of Occupy. I'm deeply supportive of the movement, but I think, like any writer, any intellectual, you know, one has to be critical. And I know that this has caused a great deal of dissension, because within the movement there is this noble idea that, you know, we can include everybody. It can be all-inclusive. But in fact, in order for the movement to survive, it's going to have to make some tough decisions about agreements, about nonviolence, about transparency, because The way that revolutions work is that you create paralysis within those pillars of authority. Most revolutions, including the Russian Revolution, were nonviolent enterprises. It's when you have the Petrograd riots, the bread riots in 1917, the Cossacks are sent down to quell them, and they don't. They join the crowds. The storming of the Bastille was only made possible because French troops defected and joined the crowds to overthrow the prison. This is always how revolutionary movements work, and the fact is, because we articulate a truth, because we expose the deep corruption within the system, there are always elements within that system that are hesitant to use force or use force effectively because they know how rotten it is. And I saw that in East Germany when, which I covered the revolution there. Erich Honecker sends down an elite paratroop division to Leipzig, where the candlelit vigils that eventually swelled to 500,000 people, and the paratroopers wouldn't fire on the crowd. Honecker lasted another week in power. And so my criticism of the Black Bloc is one over tactic. And I will just conclude by saying I'm not a pacifist. I was in Sarajevo during the war. Human beings can be pushed to a point, you were in East Timor, where violence is the only way that they can protect themselves, their families, their communities. But we're not there yet. And hopefully we'll never get there.
Amin Husain, can you respond to what Chris Hedges has said?
Well, I mean, I respect Chris Hedges a great deal, and he's been a great supporter of the movement. I do think that the word movement constrains our thinking. And I think in the 21st century, where capitalism is everywhere, it needs to require a new type of struggle and reconceptualization of how that works. I think the way decisions get made in Occupy is by dialogue and by impacting each other in our way of thinking and growing together and building power within and amongst each other. And the statement, the concerns, though valid, and I was in the Palestinian uprising, and we covered our faces in the first Palestinian uprising, and we did cover our faces, and then we made decisions at certain times not to cover our faces, depending on what action we were doing. And I think you have very smart people in this movement who are aware of the provocateur, which covering your face or not won't necessarily stop that from happening, right? And Marina Citrin has a great article in the second issue of Tidal talking about provocateurs, and in this context of a movement and how we're organized, how they can be very effective in disrupting that. But I want to get back to that. There's also, we have to rethink what is we. Because I think this ties into what you're saying, and the idea is like, we have demands of each other, right? We're not speaking to power because we don't think it's legitimate. Our actions, by taking public space and having and doing mutual aid type of stuff, and I don't identify myself as an anarchist. I'm coming from a strategic standpoint. Nothing's off the table. You empower individuals. You know, you don't disempower them. There are smart people that are making strategic decisions over here. It's an oversimplification to just say that the movement needs to make a decision without really kind of rethinking how we work. The other thing I want to add is, like, in this context of, you know, the article, though very good points, and many people in the movement felt it was good because it sparked a conversation, it came at a time when it almost derailed us. And we've worked with each other, you know, on the issue of Trinity and Duarte Square, and it's like we would have appreciated a phone call because we would have facilitated these conversations which needed to happen. And because of, thanks to your article, we've overcome it. And we have a deeper sense, because we've talked about violence versus diversity of tactics back in August, and it was a heated conversation. But many other people joined, and the conversation needed to be had again. And this is why we have Tidal, to always have these conversations.